I just want to tell you about a couple things that we've been involved in the last couple of days. Just a huge praise for those who were involved with the fishing outing yesterday. We had like 75 people come out, kids, and the volunteers. Drew Harris, which is Mick and Judy Diven's grandson, took home the first place honors. In probably more than one way. He caught the most fish, he caught the biggest fish, he caught the smallest fish. Anyway, he did a really good job. Alan Brown caught the second biggest fish. And so I think the kids just had a great time. Riker was a little bit grumpy, but I think that was just because of being out in the sunshine and that sort of thing, and being hot and tired and wanting to cast his own rod, and he's not quite that big yet. But anyway, thank you to everybody that was involved, especially the volunteers that we had. We really appreciate people coming out and working with the kids and putting worms on. And, I don't think anyone was hooked this year. Were they? Okay. And so a special thank you to Joe and Debbie Frank. They did a lot of work, and then our involvement team as well. And so just thanks to everyone who was involved there. So success. And then I just wanted to mention we have members of the class of 1962, Bismarck High School. They had their 50th class reunion, correct? If you're a member of that class, would you go ahead and stand up? I know there's a couple of people here. Technically, the class of 62 is my class too, because it's when I was born. And but I mention that because we had a group go out and we sang a bunch of old songs for them, and we had a good time. The group that went had a good time and got to sing some of those old songs and stuff by Buddy Holly and all that sort of thing. But I think we saved maybe our best song for last, and because we even did a little Jerry Lee Lewis. So hope they enjoyed it, but we did have a good time. All right, we're in Revelation chapter 17 and 18 today. We're going to read through those. I will make a few comments as we go along. I'm going to tell you that the passages you really want to pay attention to are chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. And then in chapter 18, we really are going to kind of hone in on verses 9 through 20. I will explain some of the other stuff as we go along. But we're going to be talking about this morning the harlot around us. And Jeff, I don't know if Jeff's still in here right now, but I know the old King James, calls her the whore of Babylon, but that's kind of that's kind of a shocking thing to our people to, oh, you are in here. Yeah, right here. So I'm going to stay away from that word. But I mean, obviously you're gonna find out that that's exactly what she is. And we're going to explain this morning who she is, and then also look at the great beast as well, just a little bit. But beginning in verse 1 of chapter 17, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This title was written on her forehead: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." Now, in the day in which this was written, there would be no doubt that what the city, at least, that John was talking about was the city of Rome. There's a couple of things that give that away. One of the things is the very last verse. It's the city that rules over the kings of the earth. The Roman Empire was a vast empire. It was, at that time, it was the largest empire that had ever ruled over the known populated world. And so he's making a reference here. Also, he says that it has to do with 7 hills. Rome is built upon 7 hills. And so there's no doubt that the city that he's talking about is Rome. That city, that empire, was the known evil of the day. Now, down through the ages, the beast has changed his disguise. The beast is everywhere around us. The beast, quite frankly, is evil itself. You have heard us talk about that the 2 great threats to the church throughout the ages, and this includes when John wrote the book or wrote the letter to the 7 churches, and it includes us today as well, that the 2 great enemies are persecution and seduction. Persecution and seduction. Persecution by the evil one, whatever that looks like. It could look like a dictator in Iraq. It could look like a dictator in Ethiopia or in Syria. If you notice, Syria is in the news right now. Hundreds of people being killed. It can look like even Hollywood or culture. That's the harlot. But it can look like many, many different things in the persecuting of the church. Now, the second enemy of the church partners together with evil. And we're going to look at that in just a second, how culture teams up with evil. But culture is out to destroy believers as well. God has always known that. He's always known that. And so when we look at this Babylon the great prostitute, the harlot, the whore of Babylon, what we need to understand is that she's about the business of seducing us. When we were going through this class with Scott Zorn, he was explaining that he was in Hollywood. It's been several years ago that he and his wife went out to L.A. for their anniversary to see Los Angeles, to see parts of California. And they went to Hollywood. And one of the things that he found interesting was when he got to the Chinese restaurant, you know, where all the footprints and the handprints and all that stuff outside of that place. He found it interesting what the place is called. And so to show you that the harlot is all about seducing culture, and we'll be coming back to this, I want to show you a picture. Have any of you ever been here, by the way? Okay, a few of you. Now, the thing that he found interesting, and this is actually taken from a set. They designed this courtyard from a set that they did back in the early 1900s, which was a movie called Intolerance. And does anybody know the name of this place? There is a plaque down in the courtyard with these words on it. This is the courtyard of Babylon. And what I want you to understand, and as we go through it, I hope that you see it, is that culture is all about seduction, seducing the followers of God, seducing anyone, not just the followers of God, but anyone that she can, she draws away from the one true God. That's what culture does. And hopefully, by the end of this message, you'll understand some of the reasons for some of the rantings that go on here, up here, about what we face as a people in this nation. Because we're in the heart of it. And by the way, I'm not trying to say that Hollywood is evil, okay? I'm not trying to say that all of Hollywood is, you know, that they're all involved in that, but hopefully you'll understand a little bit as we get into some of the ways that Hollywood has indeed seduced our people. Not all movies are evil. We're not trying to, we're not saying throw out your televisions tonight. None of that kind of stuff. It's just that it's one of the ways that culture uses to draw us into their way. And so, with that being said, we'll go ahead and read chapter 18 because it has to do with the destruction of Babylon. Now that you know that Babylon is basically God's name for anything that draws away from Him. Anything and everything that draws away from Him, He calls Babylon. And so let's look at chapter 18. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit and a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Mix her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torture and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit as queen, I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. Therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. When the kings of the earth who committed,'" and this is the section I want you to pay attention to, "who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury, see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, 'Woe, woe, O great city, O Babylon, city of power! In 1 hour your doom has come.' The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind will make made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and bodies and souls of men. They will say, the fruit you long for is gone from you. All your riches and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, woe, O great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off when they see the smoke of her burning. They will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, woe, woe, O great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints and apostles and prophets. God has judged her for the way she treated you. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of harpists and musicians, flute players and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No workman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's great men. By your magic spell all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of prophets and of the saints and of all who have been killed on the earth. Now, he's talking about, again, the culture around us, commerce, wealth, that driving force that just drives men insane often. Not always, but often. He's talking about the world system. It's the culture around us. So many hints in here. He's talking about all the different trades being affected simply because they're tied to the world system. Now, of course, we have to make a living. We all have trades. But understand, he's talking about people who are driven by their power and by their wealth. How many people have you known in your life because of success, they have been changed? Because of pride, because of money, because of power, they change. And that's exactly what he's talking about, the seducing of the people of the earth. It's not surprising that the world should go that way, but his warning is for us. His warning is that we don't become so deeply involved in that we're so connected that we go down with this great harlot. And so this is God's warning, but it's also his prediction that this world system is going to come to an end, the culture around us that seduces. Notice that he says that she is drunk on the blood of the saints. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that she has caused their death, but what it means is that she has drawn people who belonged to God at one time into her web, and they are destroyed. And so we're going to look at just three areas or three things that this harlot around us, this cultural, the cultural seduction that is around us and how it affects us. The very first thing I want you to understand is that culture is teamed up with evil. If you look again at verses 3 through 6 in chapter 17. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert, and there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Now I'll pause there for just a second. Blasphemous name, scarlet beast, 7 heads, 10 horns. You know, as we've looked at that in the past, that we're talking about evil. We're talking about the evil one himself. She is sitting on top of him, riding this beast. And so we understand that what is taking place there is that she's teamed up with the beast. She's teamed up with the evil one. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This title was written on her forehead, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. And so she's teamed up with the evil one. Now, this has been a problem ever since the fall. If you guys remember, after the flood, the world had grown really, really wicked, and so God decided to destroy the earth by a flood. He saved Noah and his sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, and their wives. And so whenever they had resettled, or the waters began to recede, they began to resettle. And there's this event that comes along, a city that is being built. Does anybody remember the name of that city? What? Babel. Babel. And what they decide to do is they decide to build this tower. They're going to build this tower, and the tower goes, they're saying it's going to stretch all the way to heaven. And what I want you to understand is that right there is the very beginning of what we're talking about. In fact, some of the research that I was doing is that some believe that the city of Babylon was built upon the site where Babel once stood. This rebellion against God. And it's not so much a rebellion against God as it is that they want to be God themselves, which technically is rebellion. When you try to say that you're going to usurp God's authority and you're going to place yourself in that place of authority, then you are rebelling against God. It began in Babel. Babylon, as you know, Nebuchadnezzar, one of my favorite parts of the book of Daniel is when Nebuchadnezzar is walking around. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, you could probably say Nebuchadnezzar was probably like almost every American believer, okay? Now, I use that term kind of loosely because if you know, the polls will tell you that as you ask people in this nation, are you a God-fearing Christian? Are you a believer in a higher power? They will say yes. And what we do is we lump them all together and we say we're a Christian nation. Nebuchadnezzar would make a great American believer. Well, I believe in God. I believe He's there. And you can even see evidence of that as he bounces back and forth. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they survived the fiery furnace. And so what Nebuchadnezzar says is, hey, we're not going to pray to anyone but the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because He is a powerful God. But it's not long before he slips back into his normal behavior. And so on this particular eve, he was walking the walls of Babylon. Now, the walls of Babylon were thick enough that you could drive chariots on top of it. They were... He thought that it was... not able to be penetrated, not able to be brought down. Later, the Medes and the Persians found a way to do that. But he's walking around the walls of this city, and he makes this statement: look at what I have built. What he didn't understand is that he had no more power than what God had given him. Make no mistake, God had given Nebuchadnezzar his power. God had given Babylon their power to overcome Judah, and a part of God's plan was to protect a part of the people, a remnant of the people, so that they could go back to Jerusalem one day, rebuild the temple, and continue on His plan to bring Jesus into the world. It reminds me so much of what Pilate says to Jesus. Pilate says to Jesus, don't you understand that I have the power to condemn you to the cross? And Jesus answers him, You have no more power than my Father in heaven has given you. So Nebuchadnezzar makes this statement and he goes mad. For 7 years, he lives like an animal, a wild beast, in the gardens of Babylon, until he finally is driven to his knees in repentance and he looks up to God and he repents and God restores him. Babel, this place of great rebellion, Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar are a model of buying into the idea that we are self-made people, that we are powerful people, that we are wealthy people. And yet, in the presence of God, all of that stuff burns up. It melts away. And then we come along with Rome. Rome takes it a little step further. The leaders of Rome, these kings that he's talking about in chapter 17, all of the leaders who will come, they get caught up in their power and in their empire. And so what they decide to do is require people to call them God. Caesar is Lord. And yet the believers refuse to do so. A part of the reason they refuse to do so is because of what John writes here. Caesar is not Lord. Caesar has been seduced by this great harlot, by pride, by power, by wealth, by conquering other nations. And all of a sudden, people believe they can conquer God himself. Come fast forward through the years, and it comes down to our time period when we're talking about science and we're talking about, all of the philosophies and all of the education. It's interesting to me. I'm going to be preaching on Wednesday night from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And there God says, I have caused the wise to stumble because of the simplicity of the message of God and his grace for us. It's so simple. He sent his Son to die. And yet I have confounded the wise. You remember that verse in there, 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God. And so he says, I've confounded the strong. I've confounded the wise. They don't know what to do because they have been seduced to a way of the world, to a system. And by being seduced in that way, they're being led astray. Culture teams up with evil. Now, let me go back to Hollywood again, because we're going to see that over and over again. Some of the changes that we've seen in our culture here in the United States over the last couple of decades, a part of that has been a direct effect of things like music, literature, movies, television shows, because we have been desensitized to the stuff that's going on, to the stuff that this harlot wants to push into the world. In fact, one British actor, Michael Wilding, was once asked, can you pick out actors among the crowd? And he said, yeah, it's real easy. You just look for the people in the crowd whose eyes are glazed over because the conversation has shifted from them. Actors are all about the limelight. Now, I'm not talking about actors and actresses that get involved in plays, and from occasionally we'll have skits up here. I'm talking about, I hope you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actors and actresses who all of a sudden, do you know that most of them don't have a high school education? Many of them do not have a high school education, but all of a sudden they make 1 or 2 films and people are falling over them and every word that comes forth from their mouth. Culture around us seduces us. Now, there are some guys that I greatly respect, guys and gals that I greatly respect within the acting field. Sean Penn is one of the weirdest dudes that I've ever watched his life and and see his behavior. He's one of the Hollywood bad boys, and yet I'm gonna pull his chain a little bit. He's in Haiti. He's in Haiti leading rebuilding for people there in Haiti, and so his philanthropy no one can argue with. All right. But my question is, why is it that so many people hang on every word that comes out of the mouth of someone who is an actor? Do you realize that? You realize that's why manufacturers go after them? They go after them because they know that their advertising will sell. Because this person or that woman said this. It's the reason we have fads. I mean, this whole idea of cultural seduction is the reason that we have fads in our nation. People see something, they see someone, especially if it's someone famous, someone who has hit it big, and they're using this product. And all of a sudden, people go out. That's the idea. Culture is teamed up. You have to have it. You can't live without it. And so understand that it's all around us. And it's not just wrapped up in things like Hollywood, but it's the people around us. It's the popular notion around us oftentimes. I mean, contrary to popular belief, the popular vote or the majority vote is not always right. I mean, all you got to do is go back and look at the 12 spies that were sent out. 10 of them come back. And the people follow the majority, and they're wrong. That's the idea of culture teaming up with evil. We have made ourselves God. We are in love with ourselves. All that really counts is what we think, what we feel, what we believe. That's all that matters to us. And so culture has teamed up with evil to seduce us. Secondly, culture seduces all men to follow in her way. Look at verse 2. Come, I will show... Well, the last part of verse 1. Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. That whole idea of sitting on many waters is that she is worldwide. I mean, she is all around the world. You can't go anywhere and not be engrossed or drawn into the cultures of the world. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Let me give you a couple of examples where I think this is true. Culture seduces all men to follow in her way. Not long ago, it's been a few years ago, I was asked to speak at an 8th grade graduation in Bismarck. And when I spoke there, I talked about this great lie that we have presented in this nation. And the great lie is this, that you can be anything that you choose to be. Every year when American Idol comes out, it's proven wrong. Because there are people who go on American Idol who cannot carry a tune in a bucket. And yet somewhere along the way, someone has told them that lie. You can be whatever you want to be. Well, guess what, sweetheart? You're not a singer. It happens all the time. People tell their kids that lie. And here's what I was trying to correct. You will be, you can be, you should be what God has created you to be. There's the subtle difference. God has a design for you. He has a plan for you. But you cannot be just what you choose to be. Culture tells you, it teaches contrary to that. It tells our kids, it tells our young people that they can be and they should be what they want to be, and even be who culture says they should be. Several years ago, Stephen Curtis Chapman wrote this song. I can see your tears filling your eyes, and I know where they're coming from. They're coming from a heart that's broken in two by what you don't see. The person in the mirror doesn't look like the magazine. And I can't tell you the young women that Jennifer and I have talked with about their own image, because culture seduces us to a point where it tells us that this is what any young woman should look like and be. Let's take it a step further. It has ruined so many marriages because men get caught up in that same sort of fantasy. And rather than look to their wives, they look to internet and magazines for that image of this woman that the world says that there is. And they don't understand that all of that has been airbrushed, that some of those models, some of those women have put themselves through hell to look the way that they do. Culture seduces all men to follow in her way. And we have a nation full of young women who don't understand that beauty is from within, and it's not by the outward appearance. And it's certainly not what God looks at. God's fingerprint is upon each one of us. He has made us to look and to be who He desires us to be. Culture seduces men, all men, to follow in her way. I know we keep talking about this issue, but it's right in the forefront. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And the sad thing is it's working. There was a television show, oh man, it's been probably 15 years ago it began. Will and Grace. Will and one of his friends are openly gay. It's a comedy. It's a comedy by design. It's a comedy so that we laugh. It's a comedy so that we make fun, we poke fun at it. It's a comedy because culture knows that that's the easiest way to sneak into the camp, is to make people laugh. And now we have young people in junior high who are coming out and they're saying that they're gay. Why? Because it's become acceptable in our culture. And it's being pushed. In fact, it's being shoved down the throat of the church. Culture. I watch a show, this might kind of bother you, but I hope it doesn't, but I watch a show right now on Friday nights called Grimm. I love Grimm. I think it's hilarious. It's kind of like fairy tale stuff, only it's modern day. It's a little bit violent, that sort of thing. But at the end of it, one night my wife and I were sitting there and we were watching the credits, and there's this picture that pops up. And in the picture is a couple standing there, one of them with their arms around the other. It's just kind of a portrait of them. And it falls over rather quickly. And I looked at Jennifer and I said, "Was that two guys?" She said, "I think it was." So we rewind it. You know, the treasures that we have in Devo, and you know, or not TiVo. That's it. Devo's much different. Devo is a group. TiVo. You know, so we rewind it. We look, sure enough, it's two guys. Because culture wants to seduce all men to follow in her way. It's always been that way. By the way, I've been asked several times why God had so many laws in the Old Testament and why God allowed the nation of Israel to completely wipe out people groups because of their beliefs, because of their practices. And it goes along with what we're talking about. He knew that they would be seduced by the culture around them. And they were. You guys know that. If you know the Old Testament, you know that they were. They were ordered to go into Canaan and drive them all out or kill whoever would not leave. And it was all to protect his people. You know, there's a line in the New Testament, and some people, I don't know that we've ever really struck the balance of this, but there's a line in the New Testament that says this, that we are to be separate. In fact, some people in the Old King James have quoted that to me before. Be thou separate. And I think we take it to one extreme or the other, you know. Well, one is not an extreme. One is that we either just disobey it and we look just like the rest of the world except on Sunday morning. That's not being separate except on Sunday morning. Robbie and I have been talking about this. Robbie mentioned there's a study that they're doing with the college-age kids, teaming up with Rossville, and they're doing this study on Christianity and what it really should look like. And one of the questions that was asked to a young lady who had Christian friends, she said, she was asked, you know, what's the difference between your Christian friends and your non-Christian friends? And this was her answer: they're busy on Sunday morning. So we're either at that point or we're at the other extreme where, we don't come in contact. We don't drink, smoke, or chew, cuss, smoke, or chew, and we don't go with girls who do, and that sort of thing. And I don't think that we've ever captured exactly what that's about. We are to not be in the world or of the world, but we are in this world. And that means that we can be friends with people in the world. We should be, because we will never reach anyone if we are not. We're getting ready to do this Unite concert later this month. And one of the things that we talked about in our meeting yesterday was the fact that we don't need people there thumping them in the forehead with Bibles and with tracts and things like that. What we need is to just establish some conversations, to let people worship there, to expose them to who God is. But we need to understand that we cannot be drawn in to their practices, to their beliefs. Dave Powers, a preacher that I had when I was younger, once told me, listen, you can go to any high school party that you want to go. You need to understand that while you're there, you will have a Coke in your hand, and there's a certain time that comes when it's time for you to leave. And I fully believe that. Protecting ourselves from not being drawn into the culture. Because culture seduces all men to follow her way. And when we don't, we're weird. And we should be weird. Some of you are saying you got that covered. And me. Culture seduces all men to follow in her way. Finally, culture entraps and enslaves people. In fact, let me just give you a personal illustration. A little word of warning. If you go home and you put Google Images in, do not put in cultural seduction. I learned that, Alan. If we're checking my computer, now you'll know why. Cultural seduction, don't put that in there. It entraps you. I mean, how many of you have ever been doing an internet search for something just completely innocent and an image pops up that you can't believe is there? Probably each and every one of us. Oh, there are times that drives me crazy too. They just start, boom, they start, fortunately, that didn't happen during this. But the idea is it entraps us. It draws us in. It's innocent enough to begin with, and then all of a sudden, the door slams. And we're trapped. Happens so many times. And then it begins to enslave us. Again, Robbie and I having a conversation, and one of the things that we talked about was the fact that in this day and age, do you realize the technology that a lot of us grew up without that if you were to ask our high schoolers or our college age, can you remember a time without this? They would answer no. Can you remember a time without texting? No. Can you remember a time without cell phones? No. Can you remember a time without email? No. I mean, how in the world did we ever stay connected? Now, here's the point of it. It's not to say that those things in and of themselves are evil, but it's the fact that they are misused so many times. It enslaves us. In fact, we become incensed when anyone tries to take it away from us. I can't tell you the parents who've talked with me about their kids and how they're having trouble with them. Listen, I got the solution. Take the crap from them. And if you're not brave enough to do it, call me. Your kid may never come back to church again. But we'll come and take it. Phil Miller is leading a group right now. They're leaving today to go up to Miss Pearl's in Chicago. Now, Miss Pearl's is a daycare, and it services the neighborhood. And I mean, there are hundreds of kids that go to Miss Pearl's. Miss Pearl lives in the worst neighborhood of South Chicago. The worst. There are shootings, there are gangs, there are drug dealers. In fact, it may surprise you that some of the drug dealers are the ones that protect Miss Pearl. Now, there are people that, that's crazy. It happens. In fact, we saw it, in Haiti, it's kind of the same kind of thing. The toughest people sometimes make sure that the good people succeed. He's going up there, and one of the things that he said was he's taking volunteers with him and kids. And in the morning, they collect all the cell phones. He had a 30-year-old refuse to give him his cell phone. And so he said to him, if you won't give me my cell phone, then you're not going on the trip. You'll get it back at the end of the night. You can make all your calls that you want to in the evening time. But during the day, you will not be distracted by your cell phones. And you know the sad part is, we'd probably have the same problem with a few people. Because no one's going to tell you what to do. Because culture has told you that no one should be in that position of authority. My goodness, it even happens within the church. We had people all in an uproar because we took away the voting privileges of the congregation. But I will remind you once again, the church is designed to be a theocracy and not a democracy. The only thing that you all vote for is for the preaching minister. And that disturbs a lot of people. Because culture tells us, dictates to us how it should be. And we refuse to live by what God says should be. By the way that's set up in the New Testament is that there is a group of elders who lead the church and they make those decisions. That's why we took that away. And we pray that we're a group of leaders that don't do things that would be contrary to the people, but that we follow God's will. The other night, and this was interesting to me because I read an article, a headline in Thursday morning's News Gazette, either Thursday or Friday. And it was funny that it was on there, but it said 58% of high school seniors text while they drive. It was talking about here in the state of Illinois. Now, let me just ask, this is just going to be kind of fun. How many of you knew that it's illegal to text while you drive? All right. How many of you know that there are times when it's illegal to talk on your cell phone? Okay. What are they, by the way? Construction zones and school zones. And yet, you know what's funny? I watch people drop their kids off all the time and they're talking on their cell phone. And we're surprised about teenagers who then text, because if the law doesn't mean anything to us in that way, then it doesn't mean anything to them. Now here's the point of all of it. None of it in itself is evil, but sometimes the way that we get caught up in using it is not the way that we should be using it. And here's the even bigger part of it. When someone tries to step in, it has so enslaved us, culture has so enslaved us that we refuse. We even refuse that law. And this past week, I still think some of them must have been texting. Had a dog hit out here in front of the church, and we were out trying to take care of it. 2 cars in the right-hand lane, far right-hand lane, flashing lights going. I'm in a bright orange shirt. And yet 3 times I was almost hit by vehicles because they weren't paying attention. And it could be because they were texting. This culture, it just enslaves us. It draws us down. Now, the interesting thing, and to show you, I told you to pay attention to those verses 9 through 20, and we're going to wrap it up here in a second, but go back and read that again and just look at the lament. Look at the mourning that comes out of the people, the inhabitants of the earth, the people of the world, who are so used to this worldly system, who don't understand that there's another place where we will be living, where they could be living, and yet what they get caught up is mourning the old way. The old system. Boy, I really like it when, man, that made me so much money. Well, it's gone. And they mourn. And what it brings us down to is either we have this point of that we set our minds on the things that are above. We learn to store our treasures there. We learn to live differently than the rest of the world. And in the words of Jeff's study that he's doing right now, that we learn to be weird when people look at us, that we live that differently than everyone else. Or we fall into the trap. And we become enslaved with this harlot that is all around us. I think we're going to do invitation just a little bit different. Nancy and Kenny are going to come up. And it's kind of maybe a little bit different song to use at the end of a sermon like this